Welcome to Current Issues with Dr. Kirk Meighoo for Tuesday, the 10th of July, 2018. I'm glad to have you here. We begin with today's memo, the Anti-Terrorism Bill. Why the fuss? The recent passing of the Anti-Terrorism Bill was accompanied by a lot of noise and debate, but it was eventually passed in both houses last week. Does this bill make Trinidad and Tobago any safer from terrorism and terrorist attacks? What was its purpose? Is the purpose of the bill to protect Trinidad and Tobago from terrorism, or is it to protect the international community from Trinidadian terrorists, or both? Sadly, we have had our experiences of domestic terrorism, for example, the attempted coup in 1990, the still unsolved bombings in Port of Spain in 2005, and a plot by a long-time political activist here to blow up fuel tanks at JFK Airport in New York City. In addition, Trinidad has become a major exporter of ISIS recruits from the Western Hemisphere. In fact, there may very well be links between international recruitment for ISIS and the gang warfare between Rasta City and the Muslims. That is because most terrorist organizations are also involved in international drug running, arms dealing, and human trafficking to fund their operations. This may very well filter down to Trinidad gangs, which should also be considered domestic terror organizations. But the anti-terrorism bill seems to be more concerned with the fight against international terrorism than with protecting us here in Trinidad and Tobago. However, the concern of the US and the EU with regard to terrorism is perplexing, to say the least. They support anti-government terrorists in Syria and the Ukraine and elsewhere, while condemning legitimate governments as terrorists when it suits their agendas. In fact, reflecting a sort of terrorism of their own, one of the pressing issues raised by the Attorney General was that Trinidad and Tobago would be blacklisted by over 190 countries if we did not pass the legislation, even though we are already blacklisted by the EU, OECD, and various international payment processors for years now. This scare tactic was used to attempt to rush through legislation at the last minute. The opposition must be commended for not allowing the Attorney General to sneak through laws that would expand his powers and more easily subject citizens to potential political victimization. There was a showdown of sorts, but the bill was finally passed with the opposition's concerns met and the Attorney General's power brought back into line with the Constitution. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But in the meanwhile, is Trinidad and Tobago any safer? I somehow don't think so. But at least we may have dodged a bullet. Tonight, we will speak to Attorney at Law, Lalla, to discuss some of these issues. The phone lines will also be open, and we want to hear from you. The number is 223-1601. We'll return to speak with Mr. Lalla after this short break.
On the next episode of Diversification, Not Just Talk, we talk peppers. We talk about scorpion, 7-pot, and a wide variety of peppers that are being produced in Trinidad and Tobago for the local market. But we will also explore the challenges that farmers face, and we will talk about why it is so difficult for the industry to be able to supply the agro-processing of things like pepper sauce and other pepper value-added products, because really at the end of the day, if we're producing peppers, we should move up the value chain in order to be able to maximize the value capture for Trinidad and Tobago. So join me on Diversification, Not Just Talk. We talk to farmers about the pepper industry.
Hello, I'm Andy Johnson, inviting you to join me for This Week with Andy Johnson here on IETV, a 1-hour review of the top stories of the week and the major personalities behind the news. Beginning July 8th, This Week with Andy Johnson.
This Week with Andy Johnson, Sundays at 7 p.m., starting July 8th.
IETV requires marketing representatives. Previous experience in radio and TV sales would be an asset. Full-time and part-time positions are available. For details and to schedule an interview, email your resume to actorgroupadmin@gmail.com. actorgroupadmin@gmail.com.
Hello sports fans, join me Riza Abbasali every Friday night live from 8 p.m. on IETV Sports Beat. Look out for exciting coverage of cricket, football, athletics, lawn tennis, cycling, badminton, and much, much more. Call in on our live segment where you can express your views on the world of sports. IETV Sports Beat, the pulse of the sporting world.
IETV presents to you community announcements. Do you have religious, cultural, or community announcements that you would like to have aired on television? Then send your details to ietvfeedback@gmail.com. We will air your news free of cost, Monday to Friday at 10:40 a.m. IETV partnering with you in promoting community events. Hi, I'm Dina Mahes, inviting you to join us on our program From Darkness to Light. Every weekday at 11 a.m., we will discuss current affairs, share news from around the world impacting on our diaspora, highlight community events, showcase Bollywood songs, present an uplifting inspirational segment, and much, much more. We would also have experts in various disciplines sharing with us their thoughts and expertise. In our call-in segments, we encourage you to share your thoughts and opinions on major issues affecting you. Join us every weekday from 11 a.m. right here on IETV, where we educate, enrich, and entertain from darkness to light every weekday at 11 a.m.
Welcome back to Current Issues with Dr. Kirk Meighoo. I'm joined in the studio with Mr. Lalla, attorney at law, and we'll be discussing the Anti-Terrorism Bill. Remember, we do want to hear from you, and the telephone number is 223-1601. So you can call in at any time. Welcome, Larry.
Dr. Meighoo, thank you very, very much. Good evening to you and good evening to all of your viewers.
All right, well, it's a pleasure to have you here. So we wanted to talk about the Anti-Terrorism Bill. So what is the purpose of the bill? Because I don't think people even understand what it was for.
Yeah, but just before we go into the purpose of this particular bill, I think I need to explain something. Mm-hmm. We have had anti-terrorism legislation since the year 2005. And that legislation follows on, I guess, upon the events that took place September 11, right. 2000, when suddenly the United States in particular realized the international reach of quote-unquote terrorist groups in the Middle East and decided that steps had to be taken in order to protect against the activities of these groups in the Western world.
Right.
So in 2005, legislation was passed. Our first anti-terrorism bill later became an act, and that act was amended several times since.
And what did that act make us do? So what did we pass into law in that act?
Well, it made us compliant with international standards of monitoring persons who are deemed to be terrorists, creating the offense of terrorism,
right.
And prescribing a method to deal with those persons internationally. And the act was amended on several occasions between the years 2011 to 2015.
So in a sense, it was more for us to be part of the international movement rather than necessarily preventing domestic terrorist attacks at home.
Correct.
Yeah.
So when this bill came along, it was not Trinidad receiving legislation for the first time.
Right.
It was more of a bill that was intended to bring from my reading of it, to bring our legislation in line with international developments in the fight of terrorism, whatever that is.
Right.
Whatever
and the legislation in what area? Is it like mainly financing, or is it like making it a criminal offense to belong to specific organizations?
Right. So there were already a number of offenses on our books pre-2018 getting involved in terrorist activities in other countries and joining terrorist organizations. When you look at international news, even when you look at movies like James Bond and Mission Impossible, you get an idea that terrorism is taking on a very sophisticated outlook.
Yeah.
So, banks and financial institutions are getting involved, either knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah.
Businesses are getting involved. And the legislation that was passed recently, last week, in my view, appears to be on track to deal with some of those things, to make banks liable. So therefore, banks have a duty of care in order to monitor the transactions that are passing through their institutions to ensure that they're not financing terrorism.
So do they name certain groups and institutions who should not be receiving funds?
Yeah. So unlike the previous legislation, you had specific mention of, in particular, two organizations, Al-Qaeda and ISIL, the Islamic State. And it goes back to agreements entered before the UN, where certain committees have been set up to deal with these particular organizations. And therefore, the legislation that was passed last week in the Parliament relates back to all of those agreements, sanction committees, etc., that exist before the UN to deal with these organizations.
So a lot of it has to deal with international things. And this, to me, seems like playing catch up, because Al-Qaeda now is sort of out of the scene, and you have things like Al-Nusra Front, and these things are you have these organizations which the U.S. might support or Iran might support, and then one day they're friends. Bin Laden was a friend, and next day they're enemies, and so and especially it ties up the local Muslim community, because with zakat and all the international connections with the Muslim community, and the U.S. playing one side and then another side and then back, it throws up a lot of confusion.
Yeah, I mean, there's a potential for confusion if things do not go as intended. But the fact of the matter is that since 2006, the funding of terrorism done knowingly was an offense.
Yeah.
In the legislation which was passed last week, there was some tightening of the language here and there. But I don't think it created any new offense substantively, which would interfere with persons who genuinely want to send charity to persons, in certain countries in the Middle East. Genuine charity. I don't see that as being affected, provided you follow, certain procedures. The offense is to knowingly fund terrorism.
Yeah.
So one would expect that if a person is being prosecuted for this offense under the legislation, certain investigations will be conducted. I assume that phones would be tapped, etc., in accordance with the Interception of Communications Act, and evidence gathered to show that this was not a genuine charitable activity taking place, but it was the funding of a terrorism organization. And at the end of the day, we have heard rumors in Trinidad about certain businesses sending monies to the Middle East to fund terrorism.
Yeah.
Right? We have had persons openly recruiting persons to go and join terrorist groups in the Middle East and elsewhere. So I think the legislation is geared towards dealing with that problem. And you're right, it's really, I think, more geared towards dealing with an international issue rather than helping to solve our serious crime problems.
Exactly. Do you think it will help us at all? Like, for instance, that 2005 bombing in Port of Spain, that's like most people have forgotten about it.
Although I should say, let us assume, for example, we were to have a repeat of what happened in 1990. Right? That act, which was the taking over of the state in order to pursue some political ideology, that act would squarely fall within the new definition of what is a terrorist activity, and that would be under Section 3 of the Act.
Right.
So if that were to happen again, it would be very easy. If something like that were to happen again, it would be very easy, in my view, for the state to present evidence to show that this was a terrorist activity,
right,
and all persons and entities involved in that act would now find themselves liable to a fine of $25 million and imprisonment for 25 years.
Right. I mean,
so from a local standpoint, I think that is what jumps out at me,
right, right,
as perhaps making provision for things we know or we believe there's a possibility happening in Trinidad.
Well, let's get on to the issues raised by the opposition, because this caused the issue to become a national talking point. Do you think that the opposition had raised important points?
Yeah, I think there were important points raised in relation to ensuring that the Office of the Attorney General, not any particular Attorney General, but the Office of the Attorney General, whoever holds that office, does not abuse his or her powers. And there were proposed amendments to deal with the power given to the Attorney General.
What extra powers were given to the Attorney General, for example?
Well, in relation to obtaining information, getting the Commissioner of Police to conduct an investigation, and information coming back.
So in other words, the Attorney General could have instructed the Commissioner of Police,
correct,
to investigate
correct,
somebody. And right now, the Attorney General cannot do that. Is that the case?
Well, I wouldn't say that,
right,
because when you look at the 2005 legislation and the amendments which followed, the Attorney General is a major player in all of this in terms of the information gathering, in terms of taking steps. Very importantly, if someone is deemed to be a terrorist, then his or her property is liable to be, and assets are liable to be frozen. How that is done is the Attorney General goes to the court and gets an order freezing those assets.
right.
No one else in our judicial system, our legal system, can do that but the Attorney General. The DPP, because that is a civil action and not a criminal action, the DPP cannot get involved in it. So historically, the Attorney General has always been a very important player in the working of the anti-terrorism legislation.
So let's say, before the anti-terrorism legislation, did the Attorney General have any powers to freeze assets like that?
He had powers to, since 2005, he had powers to freeze assets. And I mean, following the news over the last couple of years, one would have seen that applications have been made to the court in order for certain persons to be deemed as terrorists, international terrorists, and for their assets to be frozen. You mentioned, I forgot the name now, but the gentleman who was involved in the attempted bombing at JFK.
Yeah.
Some time ago, long before the passage of this last bill last week, the Attorney General used those powers in order to deem him an international terrorist and to have his assets frozen. So the point is, it adds, nothing new was added in that regard, but still, the opposition felt it necessary to tighten some of the language in order to prevent the abuse of powers by the Attorney General.
So, can you give us an example of some of the language? Can you remember that level of detail?
I have the bill, but to say the actual provision.
Yeah.
And also, while I have seen in the news where the opposition raised concerns, looking online, I was not able to find a version of the final bill which was passed by the Parliament. It's not available just yet.
Right.
So I can't say exactly what change was made from the proposed bill in relation to the amendments proposed by the opposition.
Right. So there was also there was some talk about the Muslim community being victimized by all this. Do you see that as valid, or or not-violent concern?
I mean, I'm subject to correction,
Yeah,
of course, but I look for it.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Right.
If persons are truly practicing their religion and doing things in a very sincere manner, whether by way of travel or whether by way of charitable acts to persons abroad, I don't see a problem. So it could be that what happened, all the gambage we saw in the has something to do with the election coming Monday. I don't know.
Exactly.
And if it does, that is proper political strategy. I can't comment, either way on it. But I don't think that once someone is acting lawfully, he or she should have anything to fear.
Right. So in the end, to sum up, because we're coming to the end of the interview, would you say that this legislation was important for us, or it was just sort of externally imposed thing that
No, I think it was important because it obviously brings us in compliance with our international obligations. I mean, countries that we trade with will want to know that we are doing our part to fight international terrorism. And importantly, that section which expands the definition of a terrorist offense to cover insurrection. I think that's important. I think that is something that we need on the books.
All right, well, good. Well, thanks for enlightening me and the viewers on the bill and what happened, because there was a lot of brouhaha, let's say, back and forth, and it may have been more heat than light, but it's passed, and so we need to understand these things as they go forward. Well, thanks again.
You're quite welcome.
And thank you. We'll be back after this short break.
IETV presents to you community announcements. Do you have religious, cultural, or community announcements that you would like to have aired on television? Then send your details to ietvfeedback@gmail.com. We will air your news free of cost, Monday to Friday at 10:40 a.m. IETV partnering with you in promoting community events. Hi, I'm Dina Mahes, inviting you to join us on our program From Darkness to Light. Every weekday at 11 a.m., we will discuss current affairs, share news from around the world impacting on our diaspora, highlight community events, showcase Bollywood songs, present an uplifting inspirational segment, and much, much more. We would also have experts in various disciplines sharing with us their thoughts and expertise. In our call-in segments, we encourage you to share your thoughts and opinions on major issues affecting you. Join us every weekday from 11 a.m. right here on IETV, where we educate, enrich, and entertain. From Darkness to Light, every weekday at 11 a.m.
Hi, this is Jairam Dindyal, inviting you to join me for the Indian Cultural Vibrations. It is 1 hour of local Indian musical content in the field of songs, music, and dances.
कपी से उड़ने हम नाही भरत भाई मैं हूँ वहाँ तो ही.
Every Saturday at 8 p.m. with a repeat on Sunday at 8 a.m. right here on IETV Channel 1.
We now reach the SMH segment, Scratching My Head, where we take a look at some of the absurd, crazy things that go on in our country on a daily basis. Public perjury permitted? Last week, the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee of Parliament examined expenditures at YTEP, the Youth Training and Employment Partnership Program. For those of you that don't know, this is one of the bodies that is supposed to protect the Treasury, and it is enshrined in the Constitution. It is composed of the opposition, government, and independent parliamentarians, and is headed by an opposition member. At the hearings last week, many shockingly unethical, unauthorized, and likely criminal activities were exposed. This includes the widespread use of high-end company vehicles for private purposes, authorizations to spend up to $10 million per transaction without approvals, millions of dollars in entertainment expenses, providing unauthorized salary advances to employees, and much more. The CEO, Nigel Fortney, even lied 3 times to the committee, like Simon Peter, when he was asked whether any of his relatives were employed there. After persistent rephrasing of the question, he finally admitted that his wife was hired as a dance tutor by YTEP under her maiden name. This is not mere lying, however. This is perjury, willfully telling an untruth or making a misrepresentation under oath. It is an extremely serious crime. Some of these instances appear to clearly involve fraud, adding to YTEP's already existing history of fraud allegations, with the fraud squad already called in previously on other matters. In other countries, he may have been arrested immediately or held for contempt. The Public Accounts Enterprises Committee head, Wade Mark, did recommend a forensic audit, which is a first step to discovering and proving fraud in a court of law. That is a welcome move. However, by his own admissions, the CEO should at the very least be suspended without pay, if not outright fired. It's time we get serious with the abuse of our treasury. We have tolerated it for too long in this country. In the meanwhile, the CEO, who clearly appears to be guilty of perjury and fraud, is still at his job, which he has held for 12 years, still in charge of our money. And once again, I'm scratching my head. Well, that's it for this week's show. Next week, we'll be following up on this issue, looking at the Public Accounts Committees of Parliament, how they are empowered to protect the Treasury, and why they have not been able to prevent so much wasteful and corrupt expenditure as they have been mandated to do. Our guest will be Senator Wade Mark, Chair of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. In the meanwhile, check out my Facebook page where you can see this and all past episodes and join in lively discussion on this and many other current issues with me and also some of the top thinkers and writers in the country. Take care, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.